and welcome to another New Game Plus. We had a really big episode last week. We had some guests on, and this week we're doing something a little tinier. We wanted to revisit an old topic that we had around. It kind of spurned out of talking about games media, but we had this talk about that kind of moment when games shifted from kids' toys to entertainment, and we kind of wanted to explore that and then how that intersects with the idea of politics in games. Because I think we learned that there was around a certain point when we suddenly started talking about or recognizing that games have messages, right? More than simply as toys. So yeah, that's what we're going to do today. That's what we're going to do. We're going to jump in on that. So maybe to start, I guess if we can try to think to ourselves, like, when do we feel like the shift from kid toys to entertainment started happening? Because I think personally, I feel like it was probably like the seeds of it were around like the, Famicom, like the NES days. Like I feel like that's when suddenly games were starting to get like a little more complex and they're like flirting with it, but like it's still kind of marketed in the sense of like, here's the toy, right? But yeah, I don't know. What do you think?
Got to remember, what you got to remember in all this conversation is that if you're saying that's when the starting point is, that predates all of us.
Yes.
And so this is coloured by the fact that we weren't alive to experience some or even all of this.
Mm-hmm.
I would say I think NES and SNES, like there'll be snippets of it, but my minding is really that PS2 is where it properly kicked in. PS1 is probably where you see the first seeds. Your Metal Gears, Metal Gear Solid rather. I know games like Vagrant Story, like they have much more of a narrative, and those kind of deeper narratives are where you find more profound messages sort of pull their way out. So that's where I'm inclined to say, well, that's where it started. I think where it started versus where it started to become impactful, very different. And obviously, like you say, when we had the conversation about games media, which is very much where this sort of spawned from, talking about the cultural awareness that came through your Call of Duties and your Bioshocks. That was a big part of it. I think in terms of when a lot of people really started to sit up and pay attention, I think Spec Ops: The Line is the one. As flawed as that game is, I think that is really the inflection point.
Yeah, that I would certainly agree with the inflection point of when we started like thinking about them in like a political lens for sure. Yeah, because I was even thinking like even just more basically like on the concept of like, oh, this is entertainment worthy of analysis, is like aside from the analysis of game design, right? Because we have to think like what are the different vectors of like how games are looked at, and like even toys are looked at on like a how does this toy function properly, right? Like there's the function question and like the interactability question. But then like I think you're saying too, there was a certain point when suddenly we were like, oh, these games have something interesting within them beyond the level of their function and their design. Which is why I feel like that's why we see like even like you're saying, I think I agree with you that PS1 era is probably when most of the seeds are there. But even like SNES era, and like I said, the NES, it's like when you start seeing people trying to create like, RPGs, but even those, they're so basic at this point, right? Like Dragon Quest, playing it is fun, but it's so fundamentally basic that while you can analyze it, it mostly is just relying on traditional tropes, right? Or traditional storytelling structures.
Got you.
Yeah, in like a fairy tale way. You know what I mean? Yeah, so like we can analyze them, but we're still looking at them as like, whether this is fair or not, I feel like they're still viewed as like, that's a children thing, right? You're like,
got you. Yeah, and I suppose there's an interesting thing where you talk about from entertainment to toys, or rather the other way around, from toys to entertainment. I suppose that's where you're saying more your Pongs versus your, Atari 2600 classic E.T. the Extraterrestrials, let's say.
Yeah, where really there's no like, and again, because some people will be like, no, I think there's narrative in this and whatnot, but it's like, yeah, it's not really the question, right? Like games, as we've talked about, can have that intrinsic narratives that can occur, but it's like, what is being expressly created within this, and is there like a desire to pass on a narrative that is similar to other traditional like media forms? I don't know. Maybe it's too narrowly specific, but I think it's like kind of an important distinction, you know?
I'll
I don't
give
know.
you
What
that.
do you
What do you
think?
think, Tyler? Hey,
Nice.
Snaps.
Sorry, I was a little bit distracted because there's people here in the apartment and I and
Well, we
there's a
can't
cat.
hear them, so you're good.
Okay, everything is good then. I don't know, like I'm trying to think because like previous to the NES and the SNES, like video games kind of started like losing the attention of the public, maybe mainly because of the video game crash of that time. So I guess video games started like lost. I don't want to say like credibility, but like people wasn't really, they didn't like know what to expect from games. So I guess a safe bet would be like to try to make like something fun, not maybe not too elaborate, but like solid in general. Um, and given like the general like what's the word I'm looking for? It's not restriction, but given the limitations from the hardware from that time, like the NES and SNES, like could try to do something like a little bit more profound, like especially the SNES, like the NES like didn't have like much space to do stuff in general. And so the SNES maybe had like snippets of what video games could really like become.
Well, yeah,
Like
because
it's like
no, keep going, keep going.
and as far as hardware evolved and some limitations were like lifted or like hardware wasn't as limiting, especially like space wise, then video games could hope to become like something more. So for me, like N64 and PS1 era is kind of where the video games like had more freedom to do stuff, especially PS1 because you have DVDs. So you have more storage, you could try to do something more.
Sorry.
And
Can we give a quick pause? My stupid computer just made like a ding noise. Do you mind just going back from like especially the PS1?
okay. Especially like the PS1 because they had like the console had DVDs instead of cartridges, so it has like way more storage space. So the developers were able to do more with it. Like haven't played Final Fantasy 7, but for example, that game was like a 7 DVD game on the
Three, I
PS1.
think.
Three, I think.
Maybe 4.
3?
I want to say 3. Yeah,
Okay.
because that was the whole thing around the trilogy of remakes. It's like one per disc, which
Oh, I see. Anyway,
Yeah, it
but
was 3.
that same game, like if they tried to do it like on Nintendo 64, it would have been like a shit ton of cartridges and probably didn't work or wouldn't be able to work like as well as the PS1.
I'm
Or
not
they
even
had
sure
to
if you
like
could do it just based on the architecture. Like, I don't think you can. Architecture, I don't know if that's the right word, but I don't think you can remove the cartridge and put a new one in, right? Like, I think CDs.
not with that attitude, you can't.
Nintendo sure wasn't going to do that. They're like, fuck it.
Yeah, but at the time, like for example, the N64 had like the information, the save of the game, I think was saved like on the cartridge, maybe. I might be talking about a bias, but
well, I wanted to actually
maybe I'm
touch on.
talking out of bias.
That's fine. There are actually a couple things that you brought up there that I think is interesting. Like when you're talking about the game crash too, like I think part of it is like that's kind of where the Nintendo seal of like quality comes from because they're starting to be like trying to bring forth this idea of quality within games. But I also think it's interesting, like you mentioned with the SNES, I think you start to see, like I think of games like Earthbound, right? Where like, you know, give or take how it feels to play now, that game it does have I think a political message within the game, and it like, or at least it has a commentary on a particular Japanese society at the time, right? Like the father is only ever being talked through the phone because he's constantly working and he's on his own, right? And like, so how sophisticated is the message? I don't know. Some debate along other lines, but you can already sort of see like, oh, there is something to dig at here, right? Like we can go in a little further. But I think what we might probably agree on is that those games were more far and few between than they would come to
Yeah.
be in the later generations.
And there's a
Yeah, because
geography component to that as well. So Nintendo's a really interesting one, particularly with the Crash, because obviously when the NES then comes over, it's pitched to Western audiences as a kids thing.
Yeah.
Even though if
Mhm.
you then look at what's releasing in Japan, you have like the Akira visual novel, and you have
Yeah.
in spite of those limitations that you mentioned, you have video games pushing to be more. And I suppose there's a component of where you were at any given moment in time as to what the perception of them was, but also what experiences those games were trying to deliver, and how much of that was just like a kid's thing, and how much of it was striving to be more.
Yeah, I feel
Yeah.
like we are sort of tarnished a bit by the fact that, like,
Well,
the way
tarnished
that
is the wrong word. It's just we're speaking from a broadly Western perspective, albeit 3 continents. We've got good coverage considering how few of us there are, but it's still incomplete.
yeah, but what I meant is we're tarnished by like the Western conception of games being as toys, like that sort of tarnished
I
the
see.
push.
I've got you.
Yeah. You jumped in on too early. That's okay, but yeah, because like Japan didn't quite have that, right? It never has quite had that. Like it's
Yeah.
always been a thing for everybody, which I think, although I don't know, who knows? Japan, there might have been periods where they focused more and more internally. I would think in Game Boy days, I mean, that was pretty clearly marketed. But yeah, it's always been a little different there, right? Yeah.
Yeah, like for example, they had the Family Detective Club, the missing girl, and
Mm.
the girl who stands behind, and those were on the Famicom. Also, one interesting thing about the original Megaton games is that there were supposed to be like kind of a response to the um RPG or JRPG like spectrum at the time, because they were more focused on like fairy tale stuff or like knights or like medieval inspiration with fantasy settings and stuff like that. Well, Megaton was born from that because it was like, hey, we don't really have an RPG that takes place like in our world. So it pretty much steps from there. Like you're in the real world and suddenly shit goes south, and usually in Megaton you're either on a post-apocalyptic world or you are living the fucking apocalypse there.
Yeah, I mean, if there ever a game to have a heavier message and theme, it is the Shin Megami Tensei series.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm so sorry. I
Because
wasn't sure
like
what we were
you
talking
see
about.
people being people.
Megami. Okay,
Yeah,
I got it.
Mega 10 for Alex and for anyone else at home who
I was like, what
has
are we
not
talking about?
who
I
who
am
has
so
not
sorry.
yet seen the light. Mega 10 is an abbreviated form of Shin Megami Tensei, which
Okay.
is one of the best gaming series known to man, and also
Yeah.
one that deals with quite heavy themes unless you're playing the Persona sort of Japanese high school variant.
Yeah. Which even those ones dabble
Even those
serious
ones,
themes. Yeah.
especially the
Yeah.
more recent ones.
Yeah.
Wow, no, that's not fair.
The
Because 1,
third.
2, and 3 really go for it. Yeah, I mean, the third hits hard. Yeah,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah. They've never. Oh my God. Sorry, everyone.
You
You just
really
lost your
went there,
eardrums.
Rick.
Oh, that was involuntary. If you know, you know.
Yeah. Damn. Yeah. So I guess that is the interesting thing. Like, there's always been these political themes within Japanese games, but I think it's interesting because I feel as though those games don't receive the same sort of political critiques that we see from a lot of games media, mostly because of the fact that they're coming from such a different political milieu, right? Like they're dealing with themes that occasionally touch on aspects that say are, I hate to use the word universal because I'm not sure that anything is necessarily universal, but like they hit on themes that maybe resonate with others, but then there are also just some themes that are just deeply Japanese and can be fun to engage with, because almost like playing a game that's set in a fantasy or sci-fi world, you feel like you're looking at something that's just not of your world, right? Like that's kind of why I like some Japanese games, because I'm like, I don't understand this culture necessarily. It feels really interesting to explore a culture that I'm not familiar with, and it feels different for me, I don't know. That's supposition, but I think maybe some of those games kind of get a little bit of a pass for some of those reasons. But yeah.
true. Thinking about that, like even other media that is like from Japan, maybe I'm wrong. I'm trying to think really old media. The one that comes to mind is the original Godzilla film. Because Godzilla was supposed to be like a representation for the Holocaust.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But here, like the Godzilla movies are like most of the Godzilla media here. It's either like Godzilla as a friend of the planet trying to defend the planet for something else, or like, I don't know, Mega Godzilla. I don't even remember the amount of movies about Godzilla.
There's a lot. Because I think
dinosaur go brr.
Yes. Dinosaur beat up King Kong. Ooh, fun. That's honestly, yeah. Well, because even I think the new Shin Godzilla, I'm pretty sure was a large part of it is focused on like the governmental response to Godzilla and like what that means. Because when you think about too, like, yeah, I mean, Japan is a country that has dealt with many a natural and then man-made disasters, right? Like, you know, think of the atomic bombings, but then we also think of all the earthquakes and tsunamis, right? Like, I mean, the idea of like governmental response.
More recently. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Fukushima, yeah. So you'd think like that's a country wherein there's a lot more weight to be had in the question of like how do governments respond, and I'm sure have had their own fair share of inept governments too, right? So like as unfortunately we all have, we keep trying. We'll get there one day. Actually, so this is interesting. Okay, I like where we're going with this. So we've had our nice little exploration. Japan always finds a way on our podcast, I guess. It's also probably because I'm teaching about them right now. I'm currently teaching in a high school, for those who don't know. It's been a lot of history stuff the last few days, dealing with crimes against humanity. I'm teaching about the real fun stuff, so politics is fresh on my mind right now. But, you know, it's interesting because when I look at Western gaming, and I think about this in particular when I'm trying to think of like what gets labeled as political, because we have games like I talked about before, Jagged Alliance 2, right? And even like the rise of shooters and like tactical RPGs and everything. And there's this kind of like unabashed and just like unexamined look at military, you know, and like mercenaries and gun culture. Like it seems to be something that I think is getting maybe less of a pass now, but even then I don't think so. Like I think it's just allowed to exist, you know what I mean? And we don't like question it too much, because I think the only time we've really questioned, like you mentioned, Spec Ops: The Line, but I would say that that's more like maybe within games media and maybe within like I hate to say it, but like niche circles, because I don't think that game really broke into the limelight, you know?
No, and it was very, very flawed, and that's sort of understandable.
But there was that mission in Call of Duty. Remember the airport one?
No Russian.
Yeah. That's the one
think that was such fucking controversy bait. It's such a Looking back on it, having played it, it's such a non-issue, but it was made into a big frenzy because it served all parties involved.
Yeah, and exactly, like it's basically publicity thing. But it's also interesting because I was like, okay, so this is now political, but like the shooting and killing of all unnamed like national bad guys is like, it's all good, my dude. And they're like, why?
But Alex, they were evil. You forget that. Yeah, really.
Right? Yeah. It's like they escape political attention, but then it's like, oh, but they're civilians, and you're like, well, they're also all computer bits. But all right, anyway, like it's just like it's interesting to me what draws political controversy, because I think it's telling of like where perhaps the flags are at the moment, you know.
And I think there's also a really, really important caveat that should be sort of highlighted, and this is something that's only just occurred to me as you've sort of been talking around it, Alex. With things like film, music, books, the medium is the message.
Yeah.
Because what you're experiencing is purely the narrative, the story, the whatever else. Games are unique in that there is a mechanical aspect to it. Now that can be heightening the story, that can be focused entirely around the story. As Paola will know very, very well from her VN adventures, because the gameplay is basically the game and the choices you make within that narrative. But then if you look at, let's stick with Call of Duty, for example. yeah, there's like the actual politics and the narrative and the identities of the various people that you are or aren't shooting at any given moment.
Yeah.
But also, what you're playing is a game where it's like target identification and like elimination. You can play those games in an entirely mechanical way, as people do every day in the multiplayer modes, and not think about who, what, where, when, why. And because you can engage with that media in a way that's disengaged from its story or message, game dependent, obviously, I think that informs a lot of the apathy towards the political messages and meanings in a lot of those games.
Yeah, I think that's a good take on that. And I also think too, and I think maybe that's where, because I don't know about that, because obviously no one's really like, there haven't been a lot of looking into this because I think it's difficult to do, but there's the question of like, what is the repeated exposure to the conceptions in these games, like in particular? Because again, I would never say that these games like you know, get people to think like, ooh, the Russians are all the bad guys, or like, you know, Middle Eastern countries, they're all the worst ones. But like, because that's something within the culture, right? Like, especially in American culture, and I think particularly in Canada too, there are like world powers that are often framed here as just like villainous, which like, look, I don't think this is a hot take, but like many governments have all done many terrible things. It's like, you know, like,
No,
I know, right? I know, I'm sorry. It's true
I
though.
refuse to believe it.
Right? It's like, sadly it's true. Yeah. And so there's the question, it's kind of like a chicken and egg thing where it's like, all right, well, is the game, you know, creating some of these conceptions, or is the game just responding to conceptions? This is the life imitate arts question, right? Which is very difficult to answer. But I do think games do have a bit of a responsibility to, you know, analyze that look. And yeah, it's interesting because, oh no, I think it vanished. I think my thought vanished.
What vanished?
My thought.
Oh my God.
I had a thought that was going in here. I was going somewhere with this. Anyway, I think where I was trying to go with this is just that we very rarely. Yeah, I'm screwed here. Someone save me, but
I just like to watch you dig, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, wait. I think I got it. I got it.
He's doing some work.
I also think, because what I wanted to add on to what you're saying is that I also think in particular sometimes the audiences for these particular games, and again I'm thinking the Call of Duties, I'm thinking the military shooters, in particular the military ones, is it's sometimes a different audience than like we know it's a bigger audience than all of gaming, right? Because those games are like the most bought games out there. And I also think that there is just, in general, a subset of that audience that is just on board with the messaging, right? Like, it's like there are a few, like you're saying, and this is why it's hard to quantify this, because you can never really know what an individual fully feels about something. But I know that there are many who just play them disassociated to it. But then I'm sure there are also plenty who are like, hell yeah, I love this. I would like to get, you know, like, let's kill them kind of thing, you know, but not necessarily translating into the real world. But you know what I mean? Like there's like the cognitive acceptance of that political viewpoint is like already there for some.
And it's hard to understate the sheer amount of people who do buy a console just to play COD multiplayer and FIFA. And those people are completely divorced of the political message. What politics? I'm just playing deathmatch.
Yeah. And that's what actually, it kind of like almost concerns me a bit, because I'm like, I think you can still enjoy the game and understand that it holds a political message, but I get nervous when someone says, what political message? Because I go, bruh, are you for real? Like, I'm like, your game obviously has a political message. It's okay. Just like, please take 1 second to recognize what it is so that at least you know what you're getting into. You know what I mean?
It's like you've not met the general public.
I know. Look, I'm a history teacher. I want just like... It's like, just like pause for 1 second and think about what your game is telling you, you know, like a little bit of media literacy is all I ask for. Like just a little bit.
But then you also have to factor in willful ignorance, because you know, if you're playing a game, and again, this is where it gets a bit more interesting in the sense that I think if you're seeking out that kind of media in other mediums, again, books, films, music, the like, I think there's a recognition that you're going to engage with the political themes within them. That doesn't exist in games yet, if ever. Games are much more of a escapist pastime, and again, I think this just comes from the reality of the way the medium works. You're inhabiting another body in another place in another time. That's only going to get crazy with the metaverse.
Yeah.
And if you're doing that to escape, it's understandable that there's a lot of people who want to escape and not deal with the political realities of anything in their own life, let alone in the gaming situation.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But at the same time, like, I know it's a form of escapism, but you can also like see different realities like from a safe place.
Yeah, should you wish, absolutely. Yeah. I'm not advocating for that approach. I'm just observing it, that's all.
Yeah.
No, yeah, but at the same time, like you could like be seeing a political message without really like knowing it, or like not knowing, but not taking as a political message. Like you get a message, but it's like it's a message.
I feel
or
like
maybe you
sorry, go on.
yeah, or there are times where you just dissociate from it all because like, okay, I know this is heavy, but I'm just here for entertainment, so I'm gonna turn my brain off.
Yeah.
And that happens.
Yeah, I feel like the Metal Gear Solid games are a great example of that, where that message is front and center. I think anyone who's thought about it, who argues those games are apolitical, is dense. But at the same time, you can absolutely play those games and skip the cutscenes and just enjoy shoot, bang, bang.
Of course, yeah, and that's the interesting thing too, though, because this is where it enters into another element that we were talking about. It's like the games that then. So I think we sort of talked like they clearly became entertainment, especially in the 360 era. Like suddenly we're just like PS2 era. It's like boom, full fledged. We've got big stories now, and I think what fascinates me, and I always think back to, of course, but like the release of Last of Us Part 2, right? And like here's a game that immediately gets labeled as political, which yeah, of course it is. All games are like they have messages within them, but it's fascinating to me that this game is not allowed to escape that view, right? And a game like, I mean, frankly, there's just so many games. Like even like a game like Metroid Dread, no one's like, no, there's no political messaging within this. And I was like, some pretty intense political messaging within this game. Like even if you don't quite think so, and it's not like it's egregious messaging or anything, but there is a take within it. I mean, militarization, conception. Anyway, I don't want to get into that yet. Maybe we can talk about Metroid Dread later in a spoiler thing. It's not like crazy stuff in it. It's just there is political messaging, but there is, I think, a subsect who, and let's be like really clear, like when LGBTQ themes pop up in any kind of game, there is a vicious horde that come after them. It is intense, and especially when that intersects with what is viewed as traditional style gaming, right? Which I don't even know what that means, but I feel like there's a subset who view like, I don't know, shooties, like you said, right? Like, get out of my shooty, which is weird to me because like you've mentioned Metal Gear Solid, which is a game that is so intensely political. People are just like, it's all good. I mean, even a game like freaking the cargo carry Best Bud game with Norman Reedus. What's that game?
Oh, Death Stranding.
Yeah. Super political game.
The only true Strand type game.
That's it. Yes, the only true Strand type game. No one cares. Like super political, but most people are just like, hee funny man, go wobble wobble. Like it's like
counterpoint. I don't think anyone played that just for the wobble wobble and didn't get the other message because it's a pretty fucking gross game if you're ignoring everything except the boxy balky wobble situation.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean though, right? Like, but like again, people saw it, but they just sort of it's like because it's
Hideo Kojima.
Thank you. I was like, how do I say
your brain's
Kojima.
Broken today.
It is, dude. I've been teaching so much. I'm dying.
That
great day. It's a great day to have a complex talk about politics and video games. This is just perfect. But again, I think maybe part of that's the Japan thing as well, perhaps coming from a different cultural vantage point. And so, I don't know, maybe his views are taken differently within Japan than they are in the Western world. But it's like there's like a bit of a pass. But yeah, God forbid you have a lesbian in your video game. It's like, dear Lord, or a trans kid in your game. You might as well dig yourself a grave because suddenly you've got so many people coming at you. It's just, it's just kind of sad, you know, like, and because for a while I'm always careful because I'm like, oh, I don't want to give them too much, you know, credence to say like, oh, so many people reacted this way. And I don't think that's true, because I think likely the majority of people played the game, and many either loved it or some disagreed with its messaging, but was like, whatever. I disagree with things sometimes. You know what I mean? Like, majority of people played the game, had a normal human reaction to the game, and moved on with their lives. But unfortunately, we just have, like, it seems increasingly more vocal subsects of the of you know, those who enjoy games, who are just like far more vitriolic, right? And like really seem to latch on to a few games that we can sort of see over a period of time that become like these focal points for their discussions on this. And it's just frustrating.
Yeah. The Last of
Kind
Us
of
2 is an
interesting
interesting test
too.
case. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I've been thinking because okay, I have like a couple of topics here, but one of them is like you can see like all the what is the name for that subgenre? Holy fuck. Is shoujo? No, it's not shoujo. It's oh my god, where did my brain go today?
What are they doing it? Don't worry, we're feeling it. What do they do in the
Both of you
game?
cry.
Okay, it's the thing is like okay, it's Otoge, and the other one is Galge. Is it Galge? I think it's Galge. The like the opposite of Jove. Like you have your male protagonist and like like pretty much a harem of girls, and you go into ride with one of the girls pretty much.
Oh, okay. So Boy Otome. All right, got it.
Well, the thing is
Botome.
that
Otome. Yeah, there you go.
Sorry, Pala, go ahead.
okay, that subsection of games, or like even like general fan service on a game, goes on the fire like way too often. Like in Xenoblade Chronicles 2, there was actually a design that had to be modified because literally one of the characters' boobs were like too big, and that design came under fire like big time because of sexualization. Like it went like really out of proportion, and ironically, but the thing is that one of the main things you see is like, oh no, that's sexualizing women, and also like, oh no, you're like pretty much making a character with a body type that is either like super like I don't know, it's not existent, and there are like actual real life people that are like in the minority and are like, hey, we do exist. It kind of hurts our feelings that you consider like that character to be like to show it just because of how her body is structured. And you have like all that thing on sexualization on video games. I'm just here sitting on a pile of atomic games. I'm like, yep. It's not like we don't sexualize men too or something like that. On the topic of otome, like otome games also can get like super fucking political. Two major examples of this, three major examples are Color Malice, because Shinjuku being like in pretty much lockdown because there's like a terrorist group on there, and the terrorist group has like each individual member of the group has like an actual thing that happened where the police force or law in general, justice failed them, and that's why they pretty much turned to the dark side. And there's people like saying, hey, I actually kind of agree with this organization because all these kind of like issues aren't like being properly addressed in the real world. And then you have Olympia Soare. I already talked about Olympia Soare and how the island is so fucked up. And it is and it is turning to like a message to like say, hey, we have to change this shit because this is totally not okay. And then you have Basta Fellows, which deals like with immigration and stuff like that.
Well, yeah, and like there's smaller games too, right? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, and it actually has a trans character.
Nice.
which is like, I think is one of the fan favorites because she's so well written.
Mm.
Which actually like really really blew my mind because it happened like I can't remember which characters from which series, but obviously people didn't like them because of how they were written. But it seems like this one in particular was a hit. But given like all this context and all these atomic games, then you have the other social commentary that is, hey, you have these relationships on the toy games that maybe are like good or healthy, and there's actually a subsection of people that are kind of like against automatic games because they're like justifying just toxic relationships that happen in real life.
Mm.
So there's like all that social commentary, like from people in the real world who maybe have played or haven't played games, to the point that I actually had an interview with a student that is doing their thesis on how like what's like otome games are like real world relationships, like if they're like linked together, how people view that kind of thing or something like that.
Oh, okay, the view between the relationships. Yeah. I mean, I think
Yeah.
that's interesting too, right? Because we have like the social and the political kind of connect together, right? But there's also this question of what political will exists within different nations necessarily, that they're like okay with certain things. Like you mentioning the sexualization, which to a degree, like I think people get upset about it for sure. And I also think though it's like
Yeah.
Japan is just way more tolerant of like the sexualization of particularly younger women, and that's where I
Yeah.
think it really becomes an issue where like there is
Oh
no
yeah.
political will for that shit, right? Like people are like out of here. But
People
yeah,
don't understand. They're
Yeah, but
900-year-old
oh
wood
yeah,
elves. Like,
like
it's totally
the
fine.
100-year-old wood elves. Yeah, my god.
oh, but I mean, it's like okay, I guess there's like a degree of how you structure your character's body that can or cannot be like okay, fuck that. But
Yeah.
I know like there's like sexualization like lower age groups, and like yeah, like no, I'm not aiming for that. And I know that also not only Japan is like more tolerant to that kind of stuff, but also it's still like a sexist country. And
Yeah.
I know there are a lot of women that really don't have a good time there because like especially like they had to make special like women only what's the name of the segment of the train weapons
Carriages.
carriages because of the sexual harassment that happens there. And I
Mm.
know that um but I
Yeah.
was talking more in like when do you want to like stop like shutting off like I want to say like creative freedom in a way? Like when is it okay or when is it not?
Yeah. Well, and I think maybe what you're hitting on here too, and something that's important, is like ultimately your game, no matter what, is going to take a political stance. Like it will, because you're raised within a nation, you're raised within, political system. You are going to privilege certain things, and that's just kind of how it's going to be, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's something to be like aware of. But like I sort of wish that we were just even a little more accepting of like a political analysis of games, and recognizing that that's not saying this game is somehow trash because it has this like messaging within it, just saying that this is an aspect of this game. And like
Yeah.
I wish developers were just a little more open about this, that like yeah, there are obviously political themes within this. I mean, Lord Almighty, I'm playing Assassin's Creed Unity. That game is really political, particularly like in its framing of the fact that it's happening during the revolution, and it frames a few leaders of the revolution as if they are Templars. That's wildly political. Like the French Revolution was one of the first massive uprisings of like underclasses overthrowing upper classes, and there's a big political like talking point thrown out to say that like, oh, well, it devolved into violence, and so clearly revolution's a bad thing, says the ruling classes as they go, please don't, like with big winks, right? So when you further a message of the idea that, yeah, it's all really just run by people with bad interests and nothing good came from this. I mean, you didn't get human rights out of this thing. You didn't get citizen rights. You didn't get like freedoms for underclasses. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, that's a political message, and fine. Like, I played the game and still loved it, but even I can recognize that's political. And if they say at their beginning, this game's not political, it's made by many people of many different faiths. And I'm like, that doesn't matter, dude. What you create in the end has a political message.
It's political. Yep.
Right? Like, you can all come from different places and still create something with a message. That doesn't negate what occurs, right? Just own up to it. And Ubisoft's the worst for this. Like Far Cry 6, it's not political. I'm like, okay. Go fuck yourself. All the Far Cry games have a really intense political message within them.
Yep.
And I find when they don't embrace it, the games are worse. Like, I think one of the critiques I've heard too with Far Cry 6 is that it's just kind of lame because it doesn't feel like it actually has anything interesting to say or like does anything interesting with setting. So it's like, dude, if you're gonna make a game that is going to interact with these things, just like go for it. Because I would rather play a game that tries, maybe fails, but at least tries something interesting than nothing at all, right? Like where it just claims that it's, I'm not political, you know, like hides in the corner. Because like a game like Back to Last of Us Part 2, you can disagree with it, but you're definitely going to have an experience when you go through that game, you know? Like you will for sure come away with at least some sort of message to chew on, you know?
Even just in the original The Last of Us, like how that game wasn't as much as humans versus zombies, but humans versus other humans, and how different ideologies just started like to crash and moving the story forward.
Yeah, and that's what the second one continues, but it's unfortunately people are like,
it has unfortunately gone under fire because of one big thing that I did, especially.
But like I said, I was going to say, I do think the majority of people had a reasonable reaction to the game, you know? Like, I don't want to come around and say, like, there's a huge group that are like, but, you know, there are camps of divided opinion, but there are some who are very vocally out. Like, I mean, Girlfriend Reviews does a good video, actually, about the harassment they received after their video, which was literally just their take on the game. Like, you know, they're like, God. Here's my take, and then they get harassed. But anyway, sorry, Rick, what were you going to say?
Well, I'm glad I let you go first because it sort of feeds into what I was going to say. Anyway, The Last of Us 2 is quite an interesting case study. One, because it came out right in the middle of lockdown number one, when lots of people had nothing better to do at the time. Also, this is at a time when more and more people are gaming than ever before. And the more people you get into any hobby, the more crazes you get on both sides, whether that's people trying to politicize the size of a pretend video game character's breasts, or whether that's people saying that characters in the game have to be completely homogenized and anything that deviates from that is evil and Satan. So you're going to get idiots on both aspects.
Like one of the, because social media is like kind of like starting like to have a momentum here in the West. Olympia, sorry, kind of got like on Reddit, not destroyed, but there was like a really vocal group of people saying that the game itself was like classist, racist, sexist, etc., etc., etc. And I kind of step like when someone like plays a game and like sees the message, is like, oh, I got this. One thing that it kind of like irks me a little bit is when you just know like the general idea of a thing. Or like, I don't know, you read the back of the books or something like that. And you don't delve or research a little bit more before like doing it, start like saying things like that. Because it's like, yeah, there's classism, there's racism, and there's sexism in Olympus Array, but that is like the thing that's the system, like that is trying to, like, people are trying to destroy. So
well,
it's
like those are worth having conversations about, right? Like it's like
those are worth having conversations about, and also like
It's
Well,
whether those,
no, it is gone. Sorry.
Rick, what
it's
were you
whether
going
those
to add?
I was just going to say it's whether those conversations are in good or bad faith. And I think the problem is, particularly with some of the stuff like that, you throw every accusation under the sun. It's in bad faith. It's ill-considered. Sometimes it's salacious and outright wrong and misleading, often intentionally so. And it all comes back to the Tim Rogers quote, where it's like the time that we live in now, the lies are free and the truth's behind a paywall. And I think that also sort of ties back into games again in terms of having a real discourse about them. The difficulty you often come up with, particularly with the more political games, is it's going to take you the time to experience that once, let alone sort of properly be able to dissect it, that it might take you to watch 10 great films.
Yeah.
It's a much more time and effort intensive endeavor. And that's always going to color the amount that we can do, the extent to which we can do it. And so you have all these sort of little problems that sort of add together that make political discourse in video games, any discourse to a greater or lesser extent in video games, much, much harder to do.
And I was going to add too, like, I think my big frustration as well is like, and it lands as almost always on like the publishing developing side, where I wish, but again, because there's this, money and good old capitalism, everyone's like, well, we want to get everyone's money as much as possible, right? And so I find companies won't even sometimes stand behind like what I believe is a humanistic and just like morally good stance in their games, and like almost have to downplay them sometimes, it's just,
listen, man, the other political party wants to play video too, so
right. And half the time it's not even like it's a political message, but it doesn't even necessarily mean that it is a political party message, right? But and this maybe is a more United States thing than even it is up here in Canada, but like they've created an excellent polarization for their needs. It's a terrible thing, but like they're so polarized that like suddenly things that everything is being like lumped into it. So I think I can understand if you're from the States, if you get tired of the concept of things are political, like why did masks become political? You know what I mean? Like things like that. But yeah.
But that's the polarizing of everything. And I think we see that in the games as well. You either have people who say, no politics in games, or everything is entirely political all the time and must always be looked at through a political lens. And it's like, well, yeah, but also no. And like, there's absolutely
nuance.
Merit. There is nuance. Yeah. There are many sort of different blends of those two in between. I think the tricky thing is ultimately going to be striking that balance well and consistently. And that's hard because from game to game, there's more or less. And I know for a fact I've sort of made this observation in previous recordings somewhere. If you remember where, remind me in the comments down below while you're smashing that like button. But like, yeah, if you want to find a political message in Space Invaders, it's absolutely there. But also, if you want to play Space Invaders, you can absolutely do that without ever having any regard for that whatsoever. And I think that is something that, if we want to put a positive spin on this, games have always been much, much better at doing. Young or old, gay or straight, whatever sort of persuasion and background and whatever you're coming from, you can engage with them more or less on whatever level you wish to, because the message isn't the entirety of the medium. And I think that's something that we should celebrate, even as we maybe in some regards bemoan our collective inability to sort of fully engage with the message aspect of that medium.
Yeah, and like you can analyze a game politically and share that, and it's okay. You're not discovering some hidden terrible thing. You're just finding out something that's within pretty much everything, right? Like, do you know what I mean? Like, like it's okay to talk about like what you think the political message of something is, but again, I think it's like you're mentioning, it'll sometimes turn into this like, I found the secret thing in the game, and it's like, well, hold on.
Right? If you play it backwards and press jump 3 times, Satan will speak to you through the power of the computer.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know. I just hope people, like you're saying, come to the game, enjoy the game. If you find out something interesting and you have an interesting idea about it, share it with us, actually. I'd like to know.
You can email us at hldvpodcast@gmail.com.
Yeah, right.
And you can find us in the Island Speak Discord, yada, 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 yada.
I would actually love to hear what people's hot political takes on games are. Like, I would be so down to hear that.
That's a new game plus in the
Yeah,
making.
same here. That's another new game plus in a way.
I'll give you my hot take on like what the political messaging of Metroid Dread is then on the next one. Because I actually think it has some really interesting like concepts in that game. So anyway, I'll save that for another day.
That could be cool. We should each bring a political hot take.
Nice. I don't know if it'll be hot, but it'll be a take that I like.
Let's bring a take. Let's bring a take.
Yeah, nice.
We can be take 3. 3 takes.
There you go. Oh, take right. Take 2, take 3. I get it. Oh, yuck. Oh God. Any final words, Paolo? What do you think?
I don't know. Like just feel free to enjoy games as like however you see fit. Like even like reading the whole message or not, getting like your own ideas about the story. I don't know. Just have fun with the thing.
I like that. Have fun and think of it for yourself. All right, that's it, everybody. Thanks for another coming in. Yeah, our next New Game Plus then is definitely going to be our political hot takes on certain games. That'll be super fun. So we'll see you all next week for another regularly scheduled episode. And yeah, toodles.
Take it easy, peeps.
Bye.
That's the Thai Tower. I like that.